Coming up on tonight's episode of Faith versus Culture, winning friends, influencing enemies. How do we do that as Christians? We're going to find out with a conversation with Will Witt coming up next.
Having sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. My name is Dan Andros. I'm the managing editor of FaithWire.com, joined as always by Billy Hallowell, also of CBN's FaithWire. What's going on, Billy?
Doing well. How are you?
Good, good. And excited to talk to our guest today, Will Witt. We'll bring him in here in just a second. But it is a topic, Billy, that I think is probably going to forever be debated, and just kind of how are we engaging in culture? You know, how do we influence people as Christians, to Christ? What is the best approach? And we've had that conversation a lot. And we're going to have another round of that conversation with a guy who's very familiar with interacting with people who don't necessarily agree with his point of view.
Yeah. Well, it's so difficult because things are so fractured, and we've kind of moved to this place where a lot of Christians, and we'll talk about this today, but a number of Christians have really found themselves in a position of saying, oh, well, maybe I'm going to bend what I would normally say or how I'm going to say it, to sort of meet culture instead of sort of holding back from that more abrasive, engagement. And so Will Witt is somebody who I think really does a great job of challenging people without doing that, which is an example we need right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's bring in Will. Will, how's it going?
Hey, good to be here, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, and you are. We wanted to first start with your story because you're a relatively, from what I understand, you're a new Christian. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I actually got baptized on January 16th of this year. I mean, best decision of my life. And my entire life, I was an atheist. And not just, an atheist like, oh, I don't really care. I was someone who would go out of my way to tell people how stupid God was, how fake the Bible was, all of these kinds of things, right? Like that was my life. And it really started when I was starting to become a conservative about 4 years ago. I mean, I realized then that the founding fathers were brilliant men, and reading the founding documents of America, you understand that you have inalienable rights endowed on you by your creator in the founding documents of America. There is no other constitution, Declaration of Independence that is anything like that anywhere else across the world. It is incredible what America has done. And so that was kind of my first thing, realizing that you don't get your rights from the government, you don't get your morality from the government, you get your rights from God. And so that set me on my path.
So yeah, I'm just thinking about this, and I saw a conversation you had with Frank Turek, who's an apologist, and you're talking a little bit about moral relativism. Was there a particular argument or thing that really stood out for you when you were investigating these claims, or was it more of like a sudden realization, or how would you describe that moment when you were kind of like, oh, wow, I'm actually a Christian?
Yeah, well, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis is, of course, one of the best guides, and I read that, and that was amazing, as well as the Screwtape Letters. But what it really was for me was during the COVID pandemic. And this was maybe last October, September. Yeah, I said, I'm not going to screw around anymore. I am going to just read the Bible. Okay, I can't come here and say, oh, I'm kind of a Christian, or maybe thinking about it, but didn't actually put in the work to do it. So I said, I'm going to read the Bible. And so I read the 4 Gospels. And just like it was with my conservatism and what I feel like I am with a lot of different things, if you read something and you understand that it is the truth, then you have no choice but to live by that. And so when I read the 4 Gospels and you understand that, okay, Jesus died for our sins, if he really did that, then I have no choice but to give my life to Christ, right? And that is the realization that I came to. It's like if you read something and you understand it to be factual, you understand it to be true, then you are either lying to yourself if you do not follow that, or you have to be someone that says, this is the truth and I am going to live by it. And so because now I had read it and understood the text, I had to make that choice. And I made the choice of saying, this is the truth. I believe it to be the truth, and I'm going to follow it. And then I got baptized a couple of months later.
You know, I want to keep the focus on faith, but I am curious because you mentioned becoming a conservative, right? And the worldview you had before that, that was sort of the starting point on this journey then toward, you mentioned obviously the Declaration, the Constitution. What for you, sparked that initial transition into becoming a conservative?
Well, I was on college campuses, and I went to CU Boulder, which, if you guys know anything about Boulder, I mean, is an entirely leftist institution, entirely atheist institution. And you would think, like, for someone like me, I would be in heaven being in a place like this. But what I found is that actually I felt stifled. I felt stagnated by the things my professors and the other people around me were saying. It didn't feel like common sense after a certain point. Once I was in my sociology classes and the professor started talking about white privilege, that didn't make any sense to me. When I grew up in high school and middle school, I was the minority as the white kid, right? I went to a school that was full of Black people and Hispanic people, and I was the minority. I wasn't oppressing these people who were my friends in school. What kind of ludicrous statement was that, right? And so these kind of things kind of set me off on a path. And I was doing research and trying to figure things out and say, why are these people telling me these things? And eventually I realized, after doing enough research and talking to people, I said, wow, the world is much different than I thought it was. Things are way worse in many ways than I thought that they were, and this moral relativism that people preach and these leftist political ideologies that they talk about they're not real. They are grounded in postmodern Marxist thought and have no semblance on what America is actually founded on or what America is actually supposed to be, and even just not even from a country standpoint of how people are just supposed to live to be magnificent individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just talking about that, I know that is the moral relativism, and then having views kind of firmly fixed in midair, right? Like there's no grounding, there's no justification. At the end of the day, I think this is a point for a lot of people that they wrestle with, that end up leaving sort of secular atheism to realize that there is got to be something greater, because otherwise you're just borrowing from the Christian view to say, well, this is right and this is wrong, and this is something that we should do. I mean, that's just a matter of preference, because if I say, well, no, it's not, now what? Well,
right.
What do you appeal to, right? It's just that you have to appeal to a higher standard. So that sounds like it's part of your story as well. But I wanted to ask you, while we're on your faith story, because you're still pretty new. I'm just getting baptized earlier this year. What are some of the tougher things that you've had to deal with, or have you not come to some of those crossroads yet? And because while there are tough questions for atheists to have to answer, there's also tough questions that Christians have to answer for as well.
No, that's a really good question. I don't always get to talk about my faith, but I remember when I got baptized, I was very close with the family of the girl I was dating, and obviously very close with the girl I was dating. And soon after I got baptized, her and I were no longer together. Then I got pretty sick. And then actually some things happened in my family that also weren't too great. So actually it was funny, because right after I got baptized, all these things happened to me that were not in the cards. I think a lot of Christians and a lot of people expect, like, oh, you get baptized and now, like, your life is just going to get better. Right. Or, you accept Jesus into your life and things are just going to go swimmingly from here on out. And for me, that's not what happened. But what did happen is that once those problems arose in my life, there was a different way to handle them. Right, from a more mature, from a more well-educated, from understanding why these things actually take place. And that was kind of the saving grace for me in a lot of these things, is that that you have this backbone of Christ that you can rely on, when you are this atheist or moral relativist or secular person, you do not have that, right? And that is why so many people, I think, turn to nihilism, why there is a nihilistic, I would say, epidemic right now in America, far more worse than the COVID pandemic, I would say, of all these young people who are atheists and secular, who find no meaning in life, who say that life is meaningless because when bad things happen to them, they have no way to deal with them except for their own strength or lack thereof.
Yeah. Well, and it's like in life, the valleys, at least for me, that's where I've learned the best lessons, right? The mountains are great. Like, it's great to have success and good things happening. Not that we want bad things to happen, but when they do happen, that's when I've learned the most. And I think, we have a real push against suffering in our culture. Again, no one wants to suffer, but there are lessons that come through that. And so that kind of leads me, I was going to ask you how you've changed, and that sounds like one way you've changed, but what are some of the other big ways that you in your heart as a person have really transformed since becoming a Christian?
Yeah. It's funny you bring up that part about suffering, because this might sound a little contradictory, but I'm a huge fan of Friedrich Nietzsche, even though Nietzsche was, himself a massive atheist. But he knew that there would be a gap to fill once Christianity died in the West, and there would need to be some sort of system that people would latch onto. But one of the things that Nietzsche talked about when it came to suffering is that Nietzsche was actually a big fan of suffering. That people should actually, in some ways, hope for suffering in their lives so that they can learn from them and be turned into strong, rock-like, unmoving men. Right? That was one of the things that he talked about. That I take to heart in some ways. You don't obviously want to suffer every day, but you want challenges to come into your life. That is what makes you into someone who is not a mediocre person. And I think that with accepting Christ and understanding that, and also understanding that, no matter what happens, God is in control. Yeah. It has made me into a person who understands when bad things happen to me, I am accepting these things into my life. Having that backbone of being able to do that has been absolutely amazing for me. And I think is even though not everyone always wants to hear it, it's the truth, and I'm going to continue to spread it.
All right, that's great perspective. Only a year or so in to your faith, so that's good to hear. But we're going to take a break here real quick with Will Witt. And we're going to talk a little bit about the heart behind his book and these interactions, because you've probably seen Will in some of his man on the street interviews and those interactions, which he's done plenty of. So we'll talk about that and more on the other side of the break. This is Faith versus Culture. Back in a sec. All right, we're back on Faith versus Culture here on the CBN News Channel. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell there, and we are joined by Will Witt, and we're having a conversation here. Will was a lifelong atheist and just talked about his conversion to Christianity and some of the things that kind of were marinating on his heart and his mind before making that change. So just got baptized earlier this year, which is great news to hear. So glad to have you in the family of brothers and sisters of Christ, Will. And want to talk about, while we have you here, your book. Talk a little bit about, what's behind the book and what you're trying to get across to people there. And then let's talk about your interactions with people.
Yeah, the purpose of my book, How to Win Friends and Influence Enemies, is essentially that there are a lot of books out there that kind of come out and say, hey, here's how the left sucks. And I wanted to make a book where people could understand, yeah, there's some things about why the left sucks, but what can you do to change it, right? I want to give people actual strategies and tools that they can use to actually talk to people and have good conversations. I'm sure you guys know it. Everyone who's watching this knows that you go on social media, trying to talk to someone, turns into some yelling match or whatever it is, where no one is actually getting anything done. And so the purpose of my book is to give people the questions that they can use to change people's minds, okay? Because the questions are how you actually do it. Going and just yelling at someone about different facts and things happening is not going to foster a very cohesive conversation to be able to wake someone up to the truth. It's about making them question their own beliefs by you asking them questions that they can't answer. At the end of the day, it's not really you changing that person's mind. It's them changing their own mind because they can't answer those questions, right? I'm rereading Andrew Breitbart's book right now, Righteous Indignation, a fantastic read. And one of the things that he talks about in the book as well, which was a big inspiration for me, was asking people, all you have to do is ask people why, right? You don't have to, when someone says free healthcare is a right, you don't have to go and say, well, here in this country, it's like all about this. And it's like, just say why. Why is it? And when you can put people on their back foot like that in a non-confrontational, a way that where you have some humility and you are not trying to badger this person, but you are genuinely asking, you can do so much good in conversations like that. And so that was the point of this book, to bring us back to a place where we can have those conversations.
Well, let's talk about your tone for a minute, because I find it really interesting. And I'm actually going to pull a piece of scripture here because I think this is important. You look at Colossians 4:5-6. It says, be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And when I look at your interactions with people, we're incentivized because of social media to really just be nasty to people, to try to win at any cost, right? But what you do is you go in and you ask questions and you have a tone that is really respectful of the people you're interacting with. How do you hold back that inclination that I think a lot of us have to go hard and to violate what we see in that scripture?
With all the strength in my body. That's how you do it with some of these people. But I've just come to the point to realize that I could make red meat content for people, content that just conservatives like, where I go and just own the libs every single day and showcase how stupid they are. I understand I could easily go and do that, but that has never been the purpose of my videos. The purpose of my videos has always been to change minds. You got to be compassionate with the people that you talk to, because at one point that person who you're saying is that stupid leftist who you talk to, that person was me. That person was Amla, who I do my show with. That person was millions of Americans now who are patriots and conservative or Christians who just didn't get the right information before.
Yeah, absolutely. And your book and your strategy there reminds me of another one that I've talked about a lot, and that's Tactics by Gregory Kokel. And
great book.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you're talking about there with the questioning. And I think you're right, because nobody's testimony, especially from, when talking politics, especially talking faith, nobody's testimony ever starts with, and you know what? I really got humiliated in an argument and somebody's destroyed me and made me viral online. Nobody's testimony starts that way, right? So I think what I wanted to ask you is, since you're a relatively new Christian and you've been doing this content, have you always had that tone kind of, has that been your demeanor, where you kind of had that attitude you had, or have you seen, now that you've become a Christian and you're looking at things, did that change your approach at all? Have you seen anything you said, well, maybe I'll do less of this and more of this, or have you kind of been on that same track all along?
Since I've been doing my videos and talking to people, I've always been on that same track, I think. I think that in conversations throughout my life, I've always been someone who is able to understand people. I couldn't tell you why. I don't know why that has happened, but I just understand where people are coming from some innate thing inside of me when I'm discussing things with people. But what I want people to remember is that when you are having individual conversations, this is the way to be. But just like Jesus said, you den of vipers to the Pharisees, when you are seeing evil within your world, you are still someone who is strong and passionate and calling these things out. Okay? Just because when we are having individual conversations, we are trying to be full of grace and compassionate and humble when we are doing it. But when we see evil on a larger scale, that does not mean that we are coy with any of these kinds of things. That means that we are adamant about shutting this evil down that we see in our society. So I think that has been kind of one of the things that I've learned as well is, I'll get questions when I'm doing speeches or things like that. And they say, like when I talk badly about things happening in our culture, they'll say, well, he's always this nice guy and so honest and things like this. I mean, obviously he was nice, and obviously he was honest in some things, or honest in everything, but not always just the nicest guy. You have to be someone who is ready to call out evil and vanquish it when you see it. So there are two ways to do it, like passionate on the macro and then compassionate on the micro.
All right, let's take a break here. We got to pause. We'll be back on the other side of the break, more with Will Witt. This is Faith versus Culture. All right, we are back on this episode of Faith versus Culture. Dan Andros here, Billy Hallowell there. We are joined by national best-selling author and host of Will and Amala Live on PragerU, Will Witt. He's also the author of Winning Friends, Influencing Enemies. We've been talking about that. Will, we got a couple minutes for some final thoughts. Why don't you just go ahead and take it from there?
I got the floor open. I can talk about whatever I want. I'm sure you want to do that.
Captive audience.
Yeah, exactly. One of the major things that I've really been pressing on right now is I understand why people do the things that they do, right? I understand that if you are in a situation and let's say your boss says you have to get vaccinated and you feel like you don't want to, but you do it anyway because you're a single mother and you have 3 kids and you need to keep your job. I understand why you do that. I understand why if you are a student at school and your professor wants you to be a leftist, I understand why you do that, or they want you to renounce your atheism or you renounce your Christianity. I get why people do these things. Or if you're in your family and everyone else is on the other side of the aisle and you don't want to be a pariah within that group, I understand why you would choose to sit with your family and be someone who is lying about themselves. But what I need to tell everyone that I think is the most important is that there comes a certain point where you have sacrificed so much of yourself for appeasing other people that you are no longer the person that you thought that you were, right? How much of the truth are you willing to sacrifice until you no longer are someone who represents the truth? It's something for all of us to think about, because the biggest thing, the most important pursuit in all of our lives is pursuing truth. That is truly what it all is all about, is living as a human on this earth. And so when you are making all these decisions, I know that so many decisions right now that we have to make with tyrannical mandates and the pressures of politics and religion and all these different things, it can be very difficult to know what to do. But I will tell you that it might seem like there's a easy path where you can lie or sacrifice the things you believe in to get a quick, easy way. But the reason why we are in this mess that we are in today in America is because people have sacrificed the truth to live easy, unpassionate lives. And if you want to be someone who stands up for the truth, you have to make the hard decisions and be the person that says, I am not going to sacrifice anything to appease anyone else. I am going to do my best to appease God and to know what is true.
Those are great words to wrap on, especially when we're living in this age where like 2 + 2 = transphobia or something, right?
Yeah,
like nothing.
I know.
Nothing adds up. So and truth is being denied left and right. So all right, that is all the time we have for this episode. Will Witt, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys. Appreciate it too.
All right, that's all the time we have for this episode of Faith versus Culture. Billy, what did you think of that interview with Will? I thought he was really great.
He was great. I love the tone conversation and the fact that we can push back about issues and champion issues without attacking people, right? I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love his comments there at the end about pursuing truth, because I do agree that is one of the key issues of the day, is that people are willing to abandon truth even when it's not pleasant or it might be unpopular. People are sacrificing truth for kind of a comfort and a feel-good sort of thing, and that's just going to lead to all kinds of problems down the road. So good conversation there.
Your truth, my truth, your truth. It's crazy.
Yeah, it equals no truth at the end of the day. Then nothing's true, if anything can be true. So, all right, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be praying for you as you go on through your week. God bless. We'll see you next time.